Sure is good to see our families back from the mission trip to Cusco. Our prayers have been answered. A lot of great work was done in the name of God down there, and we're so glad to see them back, reunited with their families and safe and sound. So good to see all of you. You look like you lost an hour of sleep. But we will have brighter weather, more sun shining this evening for our 5 o'clock services. And so that's a bonus. That's an added plus to the time change. So I hope that you'll be back this evening for worship tonight. We're talking about fire this morning. You know, there's fire all around us, though very few of us see it. There's fire we don't even see burning all around us. Maybe you remember the story of Elisha and his servant when the king of Syria was coming upon them in 2 Kings chapter 2. And Elisha's servant was terrified at the armies and the chariots and the soldiers surrounding the city where Elisha lived. And Elisha prayed to the Lord that He would open the servant's eyes. And when he did, the servant saw that there were chariots of fire all around the armies of Syria. There was fire all around him, but he did not realize it. And many of the fires burning around us, unnoticed, are deadly. And we don't see them. But God is able to snatch us out of those fires. Now there is a particular way to handle fire. You don't handle it just any way. You don't coax something out of the fire. You don't simply lift something out of the fire or push it gently out of the fire. In order to get something valuable out of the fire, you have to snatch it out of the fire. And that's the language used in our text of what God did for Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego in Daniel chapter 3. If you look at verse 29 again, it says, these are the words of Nebuchadnezzar. It says, "There is no other God who is able to rescue them in this way." The word rescue is translated from an Aramaic word, which going back to its Hebrew roots means to snatch away. To snatch away very quickly. That's how you pull something out of the fire. You don't just nudge it. You snatch it. And God snatched Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego from the fiery furnace. Notice the king confessed that only the God of Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego was able to rescue them from the fire. Not everyone is qualified to handle fire. When I was growing up, my next door neighbor was a machinist, and he had these very tough, calloused hands from handling hot stuff all the time. And he liked to have some fun with us whenever we'd go camping. We went camping a lot back in those days, growing up in Texas, and we'd have bonfires. Youth groups would get together for bonfires. And I'm not saying this is a nice thing to do, but it was a funny thing that he would do with the kids. He'd pick up an ember from the fire or a coal or something that he could handle in his hand, and he'd hold it in his hand and he'd say, "It's not hot, see, touch it." And he'd get some gullible kid to reach out and pick up the ember or the coal, and of course he'd howl in pain as he touched it, and then my neighbor friend would just laugh maniacally at the child who burned his hand. It's probably child abuse, but it was something that he did, and it was a lot of fun for him and everybody else who wasn't the victim of the joke. But only certain people are qualified to handle fire. There are smelters, founders, blacksmiths. There are fire walkers in India. There are fire swallowers in the circus. They can handle fire. Not everybody can handle fire. Who's qualified to handle the spiritual fires around us? Only God. That's what Nebuchadnezzar said. Only God can rescue in this way. Only God can snatch us out of the fire. He's the only one qualified. In the text, we see that only He could snatch the people out of 3 fires in particular. You have the fiery face of Nebuchadnezzar. You have, of course, the fiery furnace into which Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego were thrown. And then I want to talk about how He can snatch us out of the fiery familiarity of our lives in our world that we live in today, to make it really practical. Let's start with the fiery face, Nebuchadnezzar. Now, Nebuchadnezzar had built a magnificent image of gold. That's how this chapter begins in Daniel chapter 3. In the first 7 verses of Daniel 3, this image is mentioned no less than 6 times. It's very important to Nebuchadnezzar. And the men were ordered to fall down and worship this image when they heard the sound of, verse 5 says, the horn, the pipe, the lyre, the trigon, the harp, the bagpipe, and every kind of music. And of course, whoever refused to bow down and worship this image that Nebuchadnezzar had made would be thrown into the fiery furnace. Daniel tells us this image was 60 cubits high and 60 wide, which is something like 90 feet high and 9 feet wide. It was an enormous gold image, probably gold-plated. But even if it was just gold-plated, it must have cost a fortune to build, which is significant to note because in these days, Daniel 4 suggests this, that there were a great number of impoverished, oppressed people in Nebuchadnezzar's kingdom, people that could have benefited from this money that was going into building a statue to glorify this king and not used in practical ways. And so Nebuchadnezzar was building something for his own glory. What was the inspiration for the image? It just kind of pops up on the pages in Daniel chapter 3, verse 1. Where did it come from? Why did he want to build it? Why did he want to go to all that expense? There are several theories about it, one being the image that appears in Daniel chapter 2. Now that isn't a real image, it's a dreamed image, but you'll remember in Daniel 2, Nebuchadnezzar has a dream. It's about an image not fully of gold, but of layers of gold, silver, bronze, and iron mixed with clay. And Daniel interprets Nebuchadnezzar's dream and tells him that the gold part of the statue, the head of the statue, is his kingdom of Babylon, but it is to be followed by another empire and another and another. And in the days of the empire of iron, represented by the legs and the feet made of iron, a stone will come and destroy the statue. And that stone is a kingdom that will never be destroyed. We realize that's Christ's kingdom, the church. And so that was a dream that Nebuchadnezzar had. And then we see in the very next chapter, he builds an image. Now, the image that he built is not exactly like the one in the dream. And the image he built was supposed to stand for his glory and his permanence. And the image that he dreamed about was destroyed because of Christ's glory and Christ's permanence. And so it may or may not have had something to do with that dream in Daniel chapter 2. Another theory, of course, is that this was like an idol representing one of the many gods of Babylon. That's quite possible. Another possibility is that it was an image of Nebuchadnezzar himself, and he's certainly very attached to it and very sensitive about people not bowing down to it, so that's a great possibility as well. We don't know exactly what it looked like. We know how big it was, how much it must have cost to build. The point is, he made an ultimatum. You worship this false god, this image that I've turned into an idol, or you're thrown into the fiery furnace. Now, certain Chaldeans were told in verse 8, these are astrologers, advisors to the court, came forward, and verse 8 says, they maliciously accused Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego. That's a really interesting verb, maliciously accused. It literally means they chewed them up into pieces. You say that today. He chewed them out. It's not good, right? They chewed them up in their accusations about Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego. We see similarities to Daniel's accusers in Daniel chapter 6 when Daniel was praying 3 times a day against the king's edict. His accusers who were jealous of him, they told on him. These accusers, jealous of Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego, told on them. It was jealousy, not piety, that drew their criticism against Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego. And I think it's interesting that if they had not mentioned this, then we would not have known that Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego refused to bow down to this image. This is where we learn it. At the beginning of the chapter, as you're reading the story, it's not told the way that we usually study it in Bible class. We usually study in Bible class that the king made this image and the horn sounded and everybody fell to their feet, and here these three men remain standing against the king's command. I mean, that's what happened, but that's not the way the tale unfolds. I think it's really interesting that we don't learn about Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego's rebellion against Nebuchadnezzar until the accusers tell on them. And I think that tells you a little something about the character of these three men. They weren't Pharisees who were trumpeting their good works before them. They were simply just doing what was right. And when they did what was right, Nebuchadnezzar didn't notice at first. Their behavior had to be brought to his attention by these accusers who were chewing them up. How many other Jews were among them, I wonder? You know, they weren't the only three Jews in Babylon. A lot of Jews have been taken into captivity. But only Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego remained standing when the trumpets blew. How many of their brethren caved to the threats of the fiery furnace? All of them, however many there were, all of them except for these three. That must have been hard. You know, it's hard to make a stand when you're surrounded by unbelievers. It's even harder to make a stand when you're surrounded by brothers and sisters who won't stand with you. I really believe that to be true. I believe in Christian education. My kids are in a Christian school. Julie and I went to a Christian college, and we learned a lot from that, and I wouldn't trade that for anything. But I can tell you this, it's a lot harder to stand against temptation in an environment like that than it is, say, in a public school. Because when you're in a public school and when you're surrounded by, say, a lot of unbelievers, your guard's up. You know you're in unfriendly territory, perhaps. You know that there are times when you're going to be challenged. You let your guard down when you're in a quote-unquote Christian environment, and that's when temptation is even stronger. I can tell you that. And here they were, I know, surrounded by a lot of fellow Jews, fellow believers who bowed down to this image, and they might have made the excuse, hey, you know, everybody else is doing it. It won't be so bad if we do it too. They didn't get struck by lightning, but we know that if we remain standing, we're going to get thrown into a fiery furnace. And they stood anyway. These are really bold and brave men to stand alone the way that they did. So what about this fiery face? Well, when Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego's refusal to bow down to Nebuchadnezzar's golden image, when that refusal came to his knowledge, it brought about the fiery face. Shakespeare wrote, "The fire in the flint shows not till it be struck." And Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego were the objects that struck the flint. Look at Daniel chapter 3, verse 13. They ignited Nebuchadnezzar's furious rage. We're reminded that this is a king that can throw a temper tantrum. And if you know Daniel 2, I'll go back to it again, it starts out with him having this dream. He wakes up and he says, I want my advisors to tell me not just the interpretation of the dream. I'm not going to tell you what the dream is. I want you to tell me what the dream was, and then I want you to interpret it for me. And they said, sir, if you'll just tell us the dream, we'll give you an interpretation. He knew what they were up to. He said, no, you tell me the dream and the interpretation of the dream, or I will tear you limb from limb and tear down your house. This is a man with a bad temper. In fact, that's how chapter 3 ends, with him again saying, if you don't respect the God of Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego, I'm going to have you torn limb from limb. He's not a man to be trifled with. And they provoked his furious rage. He ordered them to come before him. And look at chapter 3, verse 19. It says, he was filled with fury, and the expression of his face was changed against Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego. You know something interesting here? The word expression is the exact same word for image with reference to the golden statue. That can't be coincidental. One commentator describes the irony of the situation. Here's what he said. The one who in his pride had created an image with the purpose of assuring uniform loyalty finds his own image provoked beyond his control. He was powerful enough to build and control a golden image, but he couldn't control the people of faith, and he couldn't control his own countenance as he burned with fury. And in his anger, he taunted them. Verse 15, and who is the God who will deliver you out of my hands? Such pride. But despite his anger, his taunts, his threats, the three men did not waver in their obedience to God. Look at verse 16. O Nebuchadnezzar, they say, we have no need to answer you in this matter. If this be so, our God whom we serve is able to deliver us from the burning fiery furnace, and He will deliver us out of your hand, O King. But if not, be it known to you, O King, that we will not serve your gods or worship the golden image that you have set up. They knew it was possible for God to deliver them out of Nebuchadnezzar's hands. But they also anticipated the possibility that God might not deliver them. Either way, they were not going to bow down to the image. This is not the same as Abraham being commanded to take Isaac up on Mount Moriah and deliver him as a sacrifice. In the book of Hebrews, chapter 11, verse 19, we learn Abraham's mentality in that situation was, this is bad. I'm being asked to do something really hard here, but God's going to work this out to where everybody's alive in the end. He must be planning on resurrecting Isaac. You know, we learned that from Hebrews 11, verse 19. This is not the same situation here, because these three men are considering the possibility that they will be burned alive in the fiery furnace, not to be resurrected again. They're considering it possible that there's no miraculous intervention here, that this could end as bad as it could possibly go. It's more akin to Jesus in the Garden of Gethsemane praying, nevertheless, not as I will, but as you will. And we have to understand God may allow something terrible to happen. You know, last week, the tornadoes, God allowed terrible things to happen, things we don't understand. We just have to have faith in Him, have to trust in Him. And we may not understand. And these men may not have understood, but they weren't going to change their faith. I think it's interesting in Hebrews 11, if you go down to verses 33 through 38, Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego are mentioned indirectly as those who quenched fire. I think that's who they're talking about there, because right before it there's a reference of those for whom God stopped the mouths of lions. That had to be their friend Daniel. They're in a list of a lot of faithful people. You know what's interesting about that list in Hebrews 11 is some of those people survived and some of them didn't. Some of them stopped the mouths of lions, some of them were able to quench the power of fire, and some of them were not. One is mentioned who was stoned. He's not given by name. One was sawn in two. He's not mentioned by name. But some of them died and some of them didn't. And at this point, Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego don't know which side of the equation they're going to be on. They don't know whether they're going to live or die. But they show the proper attitude in the face of fiery opposition. Their faith was not in the rescue itself. Their faith was in their God. And we have to adapt that attitude as well. When we're in danger, when we don't know what's going to happen, when bad things happen, don't put your faith in the rescue. Put your faith in the God who can rescue, and know that He will do what is best in the end, the fiery face. Let's go in the second place to the fiery furnace. It's the best known part of the story. Nebuchadnezzar ordered that the mighty men cast Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego into a fiery furnace. The text says the furnace was heated 7 times more than usual. Now, these furnaces could heat up to something like 1,800 degrees Fahrenheit. They could get really, really hot. In fact, you learn later that the men who threw them into the fire perished because of how close they got to it. So these furnaces could get really hot. These furnaces were all over the ancient world for making bricks and casting metal. And there were several different kinds. We don't know exactly what this one looked like. Some were very large. One has been discovered in Mesopotamia that looks like a railway tunnel that's closed on one end and open on the other. This one was probably the shape of an old-fashioned glass milk bottle. And the coals or the fuel would be shoveled in at the bottom, and then it would have an opening at the top, because it shows that Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego fell into the flames of the fiery furnace. So they probably were pitched in from the top and fell down into the bottom of this thing. We don't know what it looked like. We just know that they had the ability to make these furnaces extremely hot back in those days, and this one was heated 7 times, which is basically a way of saying as hot as it could possibly get. 1,800 degrees Fahrenheit, a very, very fiery furnace. Being burned to death was a common punishment in those days. Even in the laws of God, you see some cases where certain crimes, certain sins called for being burned to death. And so here, they're suffering a fate that others had suffered before, and they were thrown bound with their clothes on into the fiery furnace. Look at verse 20. It says that Nebuchadnezzar ordered some of the mighty men of his army to bind them, cast them into the burning fiery furnace. And these men were bound in their cloaks, their tunics, their hats, other garments, and they were thrown into the burning fiery furnace. Because the king's order was urgent, the furnace overheated. The flame of the fire killed those men who took up Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego. And these 3 men, Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego, fell bound into the burning fiery furnace. But the men were not harmed by the fire. If you keep reading verse 24, Nebuchadnezzar was astonished, and he rose up in haste, and he declared to his counselors, "Did we not cast 3 men bound into the fire?" And they answered and said to the king, "True, O king." He said, "But I see 4 men unbound, walking in the midst of the fire, and they're not hurt. And the appearance of the 4th is like a son of the gods." Nebuchadnezzar saw something that challenged his eyes. He didn't know what he was looking at. Who was the 4th man? He says he's one like a son of the gods. He didn't know what it was. From his point of view, we know from his religion, gods could have children. Maybe they had children with other gods. Maybe they had children with mortals. And maybe this was a demigod. Maybe that was what he meant by this. Another theory is that he was using the plural of majesty, which was a grammatical way of referring to mighty gods. In Hebrew, Elohim is plural for God in Genesis chapter 1, but it refers to the one God. And so maybe he's speaking like that, and really this should be translated, he's one like a son of God, which may refer to an angel. In fact, in verse 28 later, he says this was an angel. Maybe that's what he thought he saw, and maybe that's what he was actually seeing. Another really interesting theory is that this could have been Jesus before he was born of Mary, Jesus in his pre-existent state. We know Jesus is eternal. We know that He always existed, that through Him was the world created, that He existed for all eternity, Father, Son, and Spirit, the Godhead. We know all of that to be true. What was Jesus doing before He was born? The Father was active, the Spirit was active. Was Jesus not active also? Is it not possible that Jesus was here? In John chapter 8, He tells the Pharisees, before Abraham was, I am, He says, Abraham rejoiced to see my day, and he saw it and he was glad. So we know Jesus was active and involved in the affairs of man in some way, but it doesn't say this was Jesus. It doesn't say this was the eternal Son of God. It's not what this says. We can just conjecture about it. We don't know exactly who the fourth man was. We just know He didn't come from around there. There's a lot of coming and going in the text. If you look at verse 26, Nebuchadnezzar came near the door of the fiery furnace. And that verse also says the king commanded these men, come out and come here. Same verse, Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego came out from the fire. But if you look at verse 28, it's clear to Nebuchadnezzar and to the others that this fourth man came down from heaven. That he was not from earth, that he came down from heaven. He wasn't thrown into the fiery furnace. Only 3 men were. The fourth was one like a son of the gods, an angel, maybe God Himself walking amongst these men. In verse 28, Nebuchadnezzar realizes that he had been wrong and they had been right for trusting their God. And he says they did 4 things in the face of the fiery furnace. Number 1, they trusted their God. Number 2, they set aside the king's command and obeyed God rather than men. Number 3, they yielded up their bodies in sacrifice. And number 4, they refused to worship any god except for their own. And because they were faithful, God snatched them out of the fire. He and only He was able to rescue them in this way. Again, the words of the king are, no other God is able to rescue in this way. Snatched from the fiery furnace. So what does that mean for you and me? I'm not anticipating being commanded to bow down to a golden image under the threat of being thrown into a fiery furnace. I guess anything could happen. I need to be ready for that. But in this country, in this day and time, I'm not anticipating things like that just don't happen these days. So what is this? Just some fairy tale, some folklore, some story to talk about, some Bible class lesson that's interesting and entertaining for our children? It's so much more than that, because it prepares us for our fires. Let's talk about the fiery familiarity and 3 examples in particular of fires that we face that only God can rescue us from. Only God can snatch us out of these flames. Number 1, there's the fire of sin. Turn to Jude and look at verses 20 and following. Jude verses 20 through 23. And notice how he talks about the fire of sin. But you, beloved, building yourselves up in your most holy faith and praying in the Holy Spirit, keep yourselves in the love of God, waiting for the mercy of our Lord Jesus Christ that leads to eternal life, and have mercy on those who doubt. Save others by snatching them out of the fire. To others show mercy with fear, hating even the garment stained by the flesh. So here Jude is instructing us on how to minister to 4 categories of people who are in familiar places to us. Fires within our day and time. Number 1, it's ourselves. We've got to keep ourselves in the love of God and wait patiently for the coming of the Lord. The second category, we need to be patient and have mercy on those who struggle with doubt. There are many around us who do that. We need to do that, be merciful to them, prayerfully ministering to them so they don't lose their faith. There's a great deal of people like that in our lives who are getting closer and closer to the flame, closer to the fire of sin. The third category of people are those that are in the fire. They're being consumed by their sin, but we have some way of snatching them out of the fire as God does. We can show them how God rescues. And if we have an opportunity, friends, we must reach out and pull them out of the flames before they're consumed and eternally lost. And then the final category are those that we must show mercy while maintaining our fear, hating the garment that is stained with sin. We have to be careful that we don't get the flame on us as we try to reach out and help others. Get close enough to snatch them out, but as I said, you don't lift something, you don't carefully nudge something out of the fire. There's a particular way to handle fire. You snatch them out of the fire. Notice how James refers to sin as fire. It's not to be trifled with. You don't play with fire. Fire consumes. There are uses for fire. It warms. It provides energy. But in this case, we're looking at the dangerous side of fire. It can burn you up. Don't play with sin. Don't give in to temptation. There's the fire of sin. It's all around us. Open your eyes. It's all around you. Number 2, there's the fire of apostasy. The word apostasy means falling away from the faith. It's possible for a Christian to become a member of the body of Christ and then fall away and lose his salvation. And Paul talks about this in 1 Corinthians chapter 3, if you'll read with me verses 12 through 15. Now, if anyone builds on the foundation with gold, silver, precious stones, wood, hay, straw, each one's work will become manifest, for the day will disclose it, because it will be revealed by fire. And the fire will test what sort of work each one has done. If the work that anyone has built on the foundation survives, he will receive a reward. If anyone's work is burned up, he will suffer loss, though he himself will be saved, but only as through fire. He's speaking to evangelists, to people who build up the church, who bring people to Christ, who have converts to Jesus Christ. And he says, not all of the people you lead to Christ will make it all the way, because their work will have to stand the judgment. The judgment's like a fire, and some of them will fall away. Some people will fall away from the faith. He tells the evangelist not to lose heart. He says he himself will be saved, but only as through fire. When you become a Christian, that's not the time to sit back and relax and think, well, my work's over. I don't have to worry about temptation. I don't have to worry about sin, serving God. I'm safe now. My ticket's been punched. Now I just wait around on Christ to come back. That's the wrong attitude to have. Your work's only just begun when you come out of the waters of baptism and walk in newness of life. You have a whole life ahead of you, and there's fire burning all around you, and you can fall away. I know that it's a very popular religious doctrine around us today, once saved, always saved, but that's not in the Bible. You read what Paul's saying here. Your work, the work of those who brought you to Christ, that work of your salvation can be burned up. It's the fire of apostasy. You can lose your salvation. Let's talk about a third fire. Also, we're quite familiar with trials. All around us are the fires of trials. And Peter talks about these in 1 Peter chapter 1, verses 6 and 7. In this you rejoice, though now for a little while, if necessary, you've been grieved by various trials, so that the tested genuineness of your faith, more precious than gold that perishes, though it is tested by fire, may be found to result in praise and glory and honor at the revelation of Jesus Christ. You will be tried. God allows bad things to happen. It's a test. It's a trial. And there are reasons for His allowing it. I notice I'm choosing my language carefully here. I'm not saying that He causes it, or that He wants it to happen to you, or that He desires you to hurt. It's just in a world where He's sovereign and He could stop it, He doesn't stop it because we live in a world that, as Keats put it, is a veil of soul making. We live in a world where we're being shaped and refined for the purposes of God, and trials strengthen our faith. You might even look at it in this way: they create faith, because how can you have something abstract like faith if it's never used? Think about it in terms of love. Can you have love if you have no one to love? Love only exists when it's practiced. And can you have faith when there's nothing challenging that faith? Is it possible to believe when you don't really have to trust anyone to get through life? But when we're challenged and we trust, it's like Job said in Job 23 verse 10, in one of the darkest hours of his life, when he has tried me, I shall come out as gold. Gold refined by fire, pure and steadfast and closer to God than ever before. There are fires all around us. And like Elisha, we pray that the Lord will open our eyes so that we can see them burning all around us. There are fires of sin and fires of apostasy and fires of trials. And there's only one who can snatch us out of the flame. Only Almighty God can do that. At the beginning of the story, Nebuchadnezzar thought he was an expert with fire. He constructed foundries to cast a giant golden image and commanded all people to bow down to it. He had a fiery furnace, 1,800 degrees Fahrenheit, that he threw people into. It was burning so hot that even the men casting them in died. But Nebuchadnezzar lost control. The fires of his own anger burned towards some of his most loyal subjects. And when he threw them into his fiery furnace, they survived. Not even a hair on their head was singed. Their clothing didn't even smell like it was scorched. By the end of the story, he was declaring there was only one qualified to control the fire: the God of Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego. Only He can rescue us from the fires of sin. Only He can snatch us out of the fires of apostasy. Only He can deliver us from the fiery trials we deal with in this life. Do you put your faith in Him? Will you stand with Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego for the God who snatches us out of fire? If you need help with that, if you need strength this morning, if you need to start a life with Christ today, we're here to help you, and we ask you to come right now as we stand and as we sing.